So thank you everyone who joined us today for the Fellows Leadership webinar. The current segment that we have today is the Post-Fellowship Career Planning. We have three great panelists that have joined us, and I'll go ahead and do their introductions in a few moments. I want to start off by introducing myself. My name is Nina Nuhi, and I am the current Administrative Fellow here at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And for anyone not in New York and California, I apologize for the weather. I hope you guys are all keeping warm. So I am going to go ahead and introduce our three panelists. Just bear with me. So first we have Caitlin Hayes. Caitlin Hayes completed her 2-year administrative fellowship at UPMC. Finishing her time at UPMC, she served as a Director of Operations for Community Medicine. She obtained her MHA from George Washington University. Today, Caitlin is a Director of Quality Assurance and Compliance for Radiology and Medical Imaging Department at the University of Virginia Medical Center. She oversees quality improvement initiatives and activities within the department, as well as providing analytical support. And so thank you, Caitlin, for being here. And I do ask everyone to mute themselves if they have a chance, please. And secondly, we have Jillian, and I apologize, Jillian, I believe I'm going to butcher your last name. And let me introduce Jillian for you all. She completed her administrative fellowship at Yale New Haven Health System, where she went on to serve as the Administrator of Performance Management at Yale New Haven Hospital. She also worked in operational and quality improvement roles at Rush University Medical Center, Stanford Hospital and Clinics, and the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center. Jillian is currently the Director of Integration Management and Execution at CVS Health. Her primary focus is working across the combined organization to drive integration planning, management, and execution. Prior to her current role, she served as a Director of Enterprise Strategy at Aetna and the Director of Strategy Planning and Operations for Aetna's Consumer Health Products portfolio. Jillian is also a fellow and a member of the Strategic Initiatives Committee for the Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Management Education. She earned her MBA from Yale's University School of Management, her MS degree in Health Systems Management from Rush University, and her BS degrees in Occupational Health Honors and Environmental Health from Purdue. So thank you, Jillian, for being here as well. And last but not least, we have AJ Dunn. AJ joined Mayo Clinic in 2002 as an administrative fellow, and upon completing his bachelor's degree in physical therapy and master's degree in healthcare administration at the University of Florida. He also went on to serve as the Enterprise Director for Mayo Clinic's Administrative Fellowship Program. AJ is currently the Administrator for the Mayo Clinic Hospital and Associate Administrator for the Mayo Clinic in Florida. He has also served in a variety of progressive leadership roles, including leadership for the Department of Surgery and the Department of Internal Medicine on the Jacksonville campus. So thank you, AJ, for being here as well. So quick housekeeping rules before we jump into the Q&A segment. Myself and the rest of the individuals on the fellow subcommittee with me have compiled a bunch of questions for everyone, questions that we feel as we transition to more permanent roles within our organizations that we want answered, as well as we think that be beneficial for everyone here. So we're going to start off the first 20 to 25 minutes asking our three panelists those questions, and then we're going to go ahead and leave the last 30 to 35 minutes as an open floor so everyone who's joining can go ahead and ask their questions as well. When that time comes, please feel free to unmute yourself and you can verbally ask them. If you're more comfortable, there is a chat box option on the side, and you're more than welcome to type your message there, and we can go ahead and read them out one by one. And for those who joined, if you mind just muting your microphone, because there is a bit of static happening here and there. And if at any time you can't hear me, please feel free to chat. So I'll go ahead and ask the first question, and Caitlin, Jillian, and AJ, anyone can answer these questions, so feel free to jump in and chime in at any time. So the first question, I'll go ahead and load it on the screen. Give me 1 second. What should we look for when considering a job post-fellowship?
So I guess I can start off here. I think one of the key things to think about when you're looking for a job post-fellowship would be to look at to see who your boss will be in that position. Obviously, there are certain skills that you want to learn during that job, but I think it's really important to also understand who you'll be working for, because that person will be there to help guide and support you in that role. And then they will also be a mentor for you in case you want to learn any additional skills or work on other projects that are maybe a little bit outside of the scope of your role, that they can help facilitate that for you. So during the fellowship, you have a lot of mentors that sometimes then when you transition outside of the fellowship, might be more challenging for you to keep maybe some of those mentors, or for them to be able to help you when you're outside of the fellowship program. That I think it's really important to consider that then when you're choosing your next job, who your direct boss would be in that situation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. AJ, Jillian?
I would agree with that. I tend to think that you pick bosses as much as you pick jobs that you're gonna be in. And thank you, by the way, for organizing this. You know, I also think that one of the things to consider post-fellowship when you're looking for roles is just a place that you want to live in. You know, is the hospital or organization you're working in somewhere that you might envision yourself for at least a few years? Are you happy living in that area? Are there, you know, do you have a social network, a community outside of work? Those are things that after a 1 or 2 year fellowship, you know, as you're thinking about your life, I think are really important to keep in mind. And, you know, if you're in a fellowship, I think there's an assumption that you're a go-getter, that you work really, really hard. But I think having those other aspects thought through in a very methodical way can really help you.
Thank you.
And this is AJ. Just the other thing I would add is just evaluating the career trajectory that the potential positions you're looking at might offer. And so I agree wholeheartedly with the idea of picking your boss, but I think more globally, looking at the work unit, the organizational culture, and the opportunities for professional growth and development. I think the fellowship gives you a great platform to develop skills. And in the post-fellowship position, I think the goal should be to look for a platform to be able to demonstrate those skills, grow and develop. And so I often think about, where will I learn the most? And oftentimes I'm thinking about, for the position I'm considering, the last 3 to 5 people who were in this role in this organization, what was their path? What was their career trajectory? There are some roles in organizations where it's a black hole. Someone goes into that role and they're never seen again. And others, it's really a trampoline where people are propelled forward. And I think you're looking for a trampoline versus a black hole. And doing your homework, I think, can help you differentiate between the two.
Thank you so much. I think we see that today, especially in the realm of burnout and kind of the millennials spending 2 years in an organization and then leaving, because we're all looking for that growth and that trajectory. But at the same time, we want to not be burnt out and maintain a life outside of work. And so all of the things you guys said completely line up with things that I feel, and certainly colleagues that I work with as well. And so our next series of questions, we'll start from the top and go down. What are the skills that fellows post-fellowship should seek to develop? And I believe, AJ, you touched upon a little bit of this in your last answer.
Sure. So maybe I can just build out a little bit. So in terms of skills post-fellowship, I think it would be a great opportunity to be able to demonstrate the ability to manage, develop, groom a team. And so often in the fellowship, you are working as a part of a team, but rarely do you have accountability for a team. And really, leadership is all about driving results through the actions of a broader team. So to the extent that you can show an ability to mentor, groom, hire, hold account a team, I think that's a great skill set to demonstrate early in one's career. I think being able to translate strategy into execution, that often is the role of that middle management. So the top level of the organization is setting strategy, the front lines are implementing strategy. And so there's that tension between the boardroom decisions and frontline execution, and the ability to manage that tension in both directions, I think, is also another great skill. And then the last one would just be presenting to leadership teams. Finding ways to deliver cogent messages to the leadership teams is, I think, a really key skill.
Thank you for that.
I would agree with that. Really, I think you're spot on, AJ. I think these are in addition to what he shared, I think managing up and managing down, it requires different skill sets, and it takes some time to develop, and to do really well. And so, I agree with that. I went into consulting after taking on a provider role after my fellowship at Yale New Haven Hospital, and I will tell you that I thought I had very good technical skills when I finished my master's in healthcare administration and when I finished my fellowship. And then I went into consulting, and I just realized I learned a whole realm of skills that I just wasn't even aware of. There's a lot of art that can go into developing a PowerPoint, like how do you storyboard, how do you synthesize messages in fewer bullets, how do you actually build models in Excel? These are things that if you can nail that down early on in your career or begin to build the skill set and have a more robust skill set, I think it will just serve you well over time. And so those are the things that I think if you can get visibility to that, if you can build that core skill set post-fellowship or during your fellowship, it'll only benefit you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say I don't have that many additional skills to add, because I think AJ and Jillian both mentioned a lot of skills that I think someone should focus on immediately after the post-fellowship. But I think just to highlight some of it is also refining the current skills that you've learned and choosing those areas that you identify that you might need some extra work and refining those, which might not necessarily be new skills, but just currently working on some areas you think you need some additional opportunities.
Perfect. Thank you both. Thank you all so much. And if I keep looking down, it's because I'm fiercely taking notes to better prepare myself for the future. So I apologize. And so the second question we have for you guys is, the third question is, what skill set did you feel as though you guys may have lacked after your fellowship? And Caitlin, you touched upon that in your answer as well.
Yeah, so I guess just going off of what Jillian just said, for me, a part of what I thought I lacked maybe a little bit, but which I thought was easy to learn, was some of those Excel type tricks, where I think most people who are in the fellowship are pretty comfortable with Excel, but it's some of those more innovative ways of using Excel to build models and just some different resources that I didn't really use in grad school or for some of the basic projects I was doing in my fellowship program. Now that's partly because of the role I'm in now, where I'm doing a lot more data analytics, but that was an area that I think would have been helpful, I guess, to have maybe some additional Excel type courses.
Perfect.
For me, I guess I would just add that as a fellow, I was what I would call a directed doer. So there were tasks that needed to be done and they were handed to me, and then I would execute those tasks and get a high five from those who had designed the implementation plan. And over time, what I needed to develop was a better understanding of the why and the strategic context. And I think just with time and maturity, I was able to be more of a contributor into designing what it is that we would want to do. So charting the course, rather than simply working on the execution. And so, but for me, it had to be something that I worked on it very intentionally, to have a deliberate approach to going beyond simply being a task executor to being someone who could help to add value in the process of developing the strategy.
Yeah, I agree with both of those comments as well. So I don't have much more to add.
Perfect. And then AJ, I had a question to kind of piggyback off of what you just said. So being the task executor, how did you manage those conversations to further push them as to I want to contribute more in a more meaningful way, and I want to further gain more insight as to why I'm doing what I'm doing, without just because of the position and the rank that we're in?
Sure. So I think early in my career, I was just excited to be able to find opportunities to add value. So if someone came to me and had a deliverable, my goal was to take the deliverable and run with it. And over my career, I started to say, ultimately, I want to be the person who's handing out the deliverable than simply the person executing them.
Right.
And so I would have more conversations to say, help me understand what we're trying to achieve, or how does this fit into the big picture? Can you help me understand the context? And so having that discussion oftentimes gave me a framework of not just what needed to occur, but why. And I think because of the ability to have more of those conversations, as I transitioned into a role where I had more accountability for the performance of a broader slice of the organization, I was able to be more effective in managing not only the what and the how, but also the why.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then the question on the bottom of the screen is, have you guys personally hired fellows? And if so, what valuable skills were they able to bring to the table?
I did when I was at Yale New Haven, and actually, I think that there's a camaraderie around fellows who were part of the same fellowship program, and the valuable skills is, we've talked about the skills, but I think one of, at least in what I think is if you've gone through a fellowship, you've really proven that you're open to developing yourself, that you're eager, you want to learn, and that you'll roll your sleeves up and do whatever is needed to get done. And it's not about what's in my job description. It's about what's in my job description and more. And I have found that every fellow I've worked with, regardless of the role I've been in, or if I've hired them, have really shown that. I might just be really lucky because I've been exposed to some great people who are fellows, but I think that that's one of the benefits that one takes away from these types of learning experiences.
Thank you for that. Okay.
I have not hired any fellows, so I have nothing to contribute there.
No problem. And so then, this was actually a question that I submitted to the group, and I can further elaborate it after I read it, but it's, what if you're interested in a position but don't see upward mobility in that role, both in your organization and maybe externally? And the reason why I was asking is because here at CHLA, I've been working on the physician engagement survey and kind of assessing burnout, engagement, alignment, resilience, all those keywords that we hear today, especially in this ever technological era where there's a lot of administrative tasks, administrative burden. And it's a field that I want to further explore, especially since it's very new to us here at CHLA. But I ultimately don't want it to pigeonhole me if I ever wanted to kind of go back into strategy or operations. So what if you don't necessarily see the upwards mobility? Like, do you suggest just not going into that, or is it too early in our career paths to feel pigeonholed? You would further elaborate there.
So I don't think, I'll start by answering this if you don't mind. I don't think that there's an issue in being eager and wanting to move upward in your career. Generally what I've found is people think that they're ready to move faster than maybe others think that they're ready to move, but that's not always the case. I found myself facing this question many times throughout my career, and the reality is that even if you're not moving up, you could be expanding your role to do different things that keep you challenged. That, at the end of the day, you can say, I did my role, and I also did all of these other things that are different. And so I would focus more on, if you're going to stay in a position, what are the opportunities to do things outside of your day-to-day position, and is that embraced by your boss in the organization, or is it something where, no, you're in this role and you only kind of stay doing exactly this? If it's the latter, then you have to ask yourself, okay, is this what I really want? But if it's the former, it could be a phenomenal opportunity for you to do a core job really well, and then also expand in other areas that will round out your skill sets and maybe position you to take on different roles in the future.
And I agree with what Jillian just said. I think the other thing that I would add to that is also looking to see how that role could potentially expand your current network. So maybe it's a type of role where you work with a lot of other departments or organizations that then you're building your network and meeting other people who see the type of work you're doing, that could potentially have another role for you after you kind of feel like you're finished with this role and looking for something else, that they would have an understanding as to how you operated in that role that you felt like maybe didn't have upward mobility there.
And the only thing I would add to the conversation is just the concept of making intentional trade-offs. And so if you're interested in a position, there's something there that's drawing you, but that something that's drawing you is in a setting where there's not upward mobility or long-term career growth, So I would encourage you to, on one hand, put on the table what is it that is drawing you to that role, and on the other hand, how much do you value the upward mobility, the career growth, etc., and then to make trade-offs. And so for people who are really driven by the ability to drive forward in a career, it may not be worth the trade-off to take the role with limited upward mobility. For somebody else for whom the career growth isn't their primary driver, it's more the satisfaction of an experience, then that, or to that person, might be the higher value. And so I think it's a really individual decision. What I'd encourage people to do is be really thoughtful about the trade-offs. You know, some people may trade off geography for career advancement. They may trade off, there's lots of things to trade. And I just think those are tough things, but require thoughtfulness.
And on that note, I completely agree with that. And I would also just, the advice I give just based on personal experience and the advice that I got in my own fellowship is, if you're going to take another role, really feel like you're being pulled to it. Like, I really want to do this. Don't feel like you're getting pushed out of your current role, or you feel like you have to be pushed out of your current role in order to get another role. Really be excited about what you're about to do, and that you're doing it for the right reasons, and you consider the trade-off, similar to what AJ just shared. Because I think and things change. Organizations change. Leadership teams change. You know, you could be in an organization that's not being acquired 1 year, and then the next year, your organization could be getting acquired. And there's all these new opportunities that might be coming up. And so I think having some patience as you make this type of decision, and really considering those trade-offs, will only serve you well.
And if I could just add one other comment to that, that Jillian sparked in my mind, is that I've tried to use a general rule of thumb of spending probably 90% of my discretionary effort as I think about career development around how can I be successful in my current position, and then spending about 10% thinking about how do I position myself for the next. And I think that that has served me well in terms of avoiding the trap that I see often, where people are failing in their current role, yet they're looking for advancement down the road. And so trying to think about how do I make sure that I'm currently successful, because success in the current role will facilitate being attractive for growth and development. And so, you know, the concept of upward mobility, I think, should always be secondary to how do I grow and add value to the organization in my current role. And oftentimes people spend too little time thinking about current state success because they're focused on future state investments.
Right. No, I really appreciate all of that. I think the three of you have nailed it. And then especially Jillian, when you mentioned this notion of you should be pulled to something and not pushed. I mean, I speak for myself, but maybe others would agree that while you're a fellow, or kind of when you're younger, you're told to say yes to everything. And so hearing that, I think a lot of times I've been pushed, whereas sometimes, you know, like you really should be pulled. And so I really appreciate the commentary there. I believe I jumped a slide. Give me 1 second. Okay. What advice do you have for someone looking for a post-fellowship job outside of their current organization?
So I can start with that. That is something that I did once I finished my fellowship at UPMC, came to UVA shortly afterwards. I think something that's important to consider is that during your fellowship, you've spent a lot of time with the organization, so you understand their culture pretty well at that point. That then when you're looking for a job, which might be your first job really that you're applying for outside your master's degree, that you have to really understand what that culture is like and understand that will be different than where you are now. So I think spending time to figure that out is important, to understand if that's the type of environment that you'll fit in with well. So it can be hard during the interview to get that type of information because they're trying to present their organization in the best light. So being able to have conversations with individuals who work at that organization, maybe outside of the formal interviews, I think is helpful to really understand what the day-to-day life is like in that current organization.
Perfect. Thank you.
My two comments are a little bit more in the weeds, but I think it matters a lot because the healthcare industry is really small. So first, if you're looking for a role, you've gone through a healthcare administration program, your most valuable asset is your alumni network. So I would start there. It's helpful just to get connections to folks. Unless you find a role online and you're lucky that you've applied and someone's looked at it and then called you, but I've often found that it's through those connections where those opportunities tend to come up. The other thing is just, and I really didn't appreciate this until after I left the organization that I completed a fellowship at, but there are a lot of people that have invested time and energy into you in your fellowship. And there are many organizations that take a lot of pride in continuing to hire fellows. So I think being really thoughtful around how you message that you're looking for success elsewhere, making sure that your direct boss or your sponsor is on board with you, you guys are on the same page, not throwing any surprises as you look for other roles and depart the organization, and just being very respectful of that, I think is, something that I would suggest. And I really do suggest that based on my experience. And it's not that I was disrespectful, but, I was focused very much, I was younger, and I was very much focused on what AJ talked about, which is what's the next role. And I don't think I gave it enough justice and really spent enough time saying goodbye to folks, for example, or, and it matters a lot to these folks who have spent time with you. And so, planning that process in a very thoughtful way, not just giving 2 weeks notice or a month's notice, and, agreeing with your boss around the messaging around it and being on the same page is just something I highly recommend.
Thank you so much. That's really great to know. So we have a couple more minutes till we open up to the audience here. So I'm going to jump ahead to maybe one specific one that might benefit everyone, and that's around negotiation skills, especially when it comes to compensation or benefits or some type of package. How do you guys think we should better prepare for those conversations? What's an appropriate conversation? What's not an appropriate conversation? So on and so forth.
I may defer to the others because I would just share that I've done this really poorly myself in the past, and that in almost every role I've had, I've accepted the job way before I knew what the salary, benefits, compensation was. And that's a large part because I've been with Mayo for 17 years, and most of those have been a tap on the shoulder promotion internally. And it wasn't until I was in a more senior leadership role that I saw people I was hiring pushing back and negotiating, looking for more. And oftentimes they were actually able to get a slightly better deal, so to speak, by playing a little bit harder ball. But I would say, though I found that I didn't do it myself and others have done it successfully, one of the things to avoid is a transactional relationship where if you give me 2 cents more, I will then be committed to your organization. And still, rather than focusing on just the foundational aspects of shared vision, mutual interest, trust. And so I certainly think people should negotiate if they feel that there's value that they should receive, but I'll just try to make sure that you avoid becoming overly transactional in the process. And again, I share that as someone who hasn't ever really negotiated just because of being excited about what was coming down the road. It's like, hey, we would like to offer you, and I'm like, yes.
So, if you have time, I think reading negotiation books helps just to kind of get a sense of the terminology that these masterful folks who are sometimes sitting across the table from you know. With that said, you should always know your market value. It is very easy to say yes when you're excited about a role and maybe accept something that's below the market value that you, as someone who's earned perhaps a master's degree or 2, or as you as someone who's following in the footsteps of someone who might have done the exact same role and got compensated at a higher level. So you need to know your market value. I think you also need to know something that's titled BATNA, and it's an acronym for the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So my personal opinion is you should never go in and your BATNA is, I either get this job or I have nothing else. And so you want something else. If it's not like someone tapping you on the shoulder at the organization and saying, hey, we have this great opportunity. You want to have a backup. if it doesn't work out. You want an alternative. And so, I would just have that in mind. And the other thing is what's really helped me is before I go into any negotiation whatsoever in any of the roles I've been in, I write down my numbers. And I literally write it down on a piece of paper. And the reason for that is because it helps remind me, okay, if I get 1 cent less than what they're saying, this is not what I want. It's not what I believe I should be at. It's lower than what I'm currently compensated. It's not, and it just keeps you in check. It's a very small detail, but I know enough people that have done this in their careers and have helped keep the discussion focused. Lastly, I would just say, you can say things like, I have a lot of school debt, or my family's here. But at the end of the day, everyone has responsibilities and has a lot of pressure and has to think about these things. So I don't know how much that's going to really help you, unless you're moving your entire life somewhere different, for example, where those things actually do play. Sorry, one more thing as I'm thinking about this, because I've actually spent quite a bit of time thinking about this over the years. Base salary is not everything. It's important. It's not everything. When you're thinking about negotiations, you should be thinking about things like, do I have a company cell phone? What are my days off? Some companies have different PTO days depending on the level that you're at. How much are you matching on my 401k? What are my health benefits? These are things that I'm not saying you can negotiate every aspect of it, but you should package it together as you're looking at different jobs and see what overall helps me maximize my wealth and my position to be comfortable in my retirement. And those are things that are really important to keep in mind as you negotiate and also think about different opportunities.
Thank you so much. I believe I've certainly benefited from that conversation. I think everyone else can say the same as well.
Yeah, the only other thing I could add to what Jillian was just saying too is also looking that maybe the organization can give you a couple, more dollars to your base salary, but maybe they're willing to give you money every year to go to a conference or for other professional development that I think is also worth exploring as well, including some of those other items that Jillian just mentioned in addition to base salary.
Perfect. Thank you guys all so much. And before I open up to the floor, I also want to say thank you to Natasha, who helped organize and facilitate and kind of get everything up and running for us today. So I'll go ahead and open it to the floor for right now. If there is some silences here and there, I can go ahead. We have a couple of questions still in the queue that I can ask as well. If you're comfortable, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in. If you prefer to type your message in the chat box, please do so at any time. I'll go ahead and read them out for everyone one at a time. But if no one has any questions in the meantime, I have a couple more, so we can kind of go back, and then feel free to chat if it's easier as well. I'm not sure if, so someone does have a question. Their audio was not working, so I'll go ahead and wait for them to type it up for us. So someone currently asked that, Jillian, you mentioned reading negotiation books. Do you have any suggestions in particular?
You know what I do? I just, a bunch of them are from HBS, Harvard Business School professors. And of course I said there's negotiation books and I'm blanking, but I'm more than happy to give you the information. I TA'd a negotiation class at the Yale School of Management. And so I went through the class and then I TA'd it. And a lot of the coursework was based on the work that were done by negotiation professors at Harvard. And I literally remember what the book looks like, but I forgot the name of it.
No
but
worries.
but I can provide that to you, so I apologize I don't have the name.
No worries. Someone suggested getting to yes on the chat as an option. So Jillian, whenever you do have
Yeah, so actually, I'm sorry to interrupt. Megan Howell just said it's getting to yes, and that is actually right.
Yes, perfect. Perfect. And then we do have a couple of questions, so I'm going to start off with Jinu. How do you guys suggest conversations with executives about possible opportunities within the organization?
So I think if you're currently in a fellowship or a residency and you have mentors there, to start the conversation with them, someone that you're close to, and to talk about what you feel like is the type of role you would like to be in, whether it's skills you want to develop or a specific area within the organization that you want to be in, and start that conversation with them to see, A, do they know of any current opportunities that might be coming available soon, and B, if they don't, do they have someone that they can put you in touch with that then you can meet with them to better understand what their role is and if they would have any opportunities within their area as you're looking for current jobs. I think like what some of the other panelists have mentioned before is that organizations really want to keep fellows and residents because it is their training program. So I think being in the fellowship or residency program and reaching out to people and talking about you're finishing up your residency and this is the type of role you're looking for, executives are generally, willing to meet with you and have those conversations to help get that started.
Perfect. And then someone asked a question that kind of follows up to what you just were speaking about, Caitlin. So I promise I'll get back to everyone else in the queue. It was just a good transition point. They asked that, assuming that everyone's fellowship, for the most part, will end and phase out in June and July, when do you believe that we should start asking those questions and speaking to those individuals?
I'm happy to wait.
Go ahead, EJ.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, so for us, we've got a pretty large fellowship. We have a 2-year fellowship where our goal is to hire 7 fellows per year. So we'll have a full complement of 14 fellows. And our general rule of thumb is as we get into December, January, before the end of the fellowship is when we really want to start looking at what the permanent placement would be. And in terms of the best way to approach that, we tend to look for conversations about mutual benefits. So what's the fellow interested in and where are organizational needs? And if we can find the intersection between their needs, our needs and their interests, then that's usually what we try to focus on.
Perfect. And Caitlin, thanks.
I was going to give the same exact timeline. I feel like around December to January is a good time to start having those conversations.
Okay, and that's applicable for both 2-year fellowships and 1-year fellowships, correct? Because for the 1 year, by the December-January timeline, you've been there roughly 6 months? Perfect. Okay, I'm going to go back up. We have a lot of questions in the queue coming in. So the second one I had was, would you suggest being a project manager with strategic initiatives closer to execs versus managers with FTEs?
So every organization has a different kind of threshold in terms of when they allow you to manage people. There are like and you may have people at different phases of their career managing others, which is completely normal. But, after a 1-year fellowship, let's assume you walked into a graduate program, you finished your 1-year fellowship at 25, 26. Let's just say that's an average. It depends how much experience you have, but I haven't really seen that many people go directly into management roles of people. You could be in a project manager role and then maybe shortly after start managing people, but that's just been my experience, so it may be just limited. With that said, as someone who's been in operational roles and strategic roles, I think there's a huge benefit to being in both and then also managing people, but you're really flexing different muscles when you manage people, when you're in project management roles. And I think what you have to really think about is, who am I working for? And am I going to do the very best in my role given the responsibilities asked of me and the support I'm getting from my boss and the culture in which I'm functioning? And if there's a nice synergy there, then that's great. But if you are managing a bunch of people, you don't have a ton of experience in managing people, and your boss is at times maybe an executive and is more unavailable, is this the right time for you to be managing people? So I would answer the question by thinking about the fact that your career will be 30 plus years, hopefully. And there are times where it's better to manage others. And there are times when it's better to be working on strategic projects with executives, and then really thinking about what's your experience level going in. I know that answers the question, but that's the best way I can answer that question.
No, I think that was actually a great way to answer that question. Thank you for that. I'm going to keep going down the queue. Are there any recommendations for how we should explain our fellowship experiences on our resume? So for example, for those who are in a 2-year program, did you focus on your intensive project, or did you focus more on a combination of everything?
So I
focus on where you have numbers. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Caitlin.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in resumes, you're looking, at least I do, I think having numbers are powerful. So anything where you can actually show number improvements helps. And regardless of what you do, whether you're focusing on both, you do want to say somewhere selected for a highly competitive fellowship. Many people know it's competitive, but maybe someone who's looking at your resume doesn't quite understand what an administrative fellowship is.
Mm-hmm. And then to talk about the 2-year program, 2-year fellowship, I think it's important to be able to focus on what are the things you were able to accomplish during your fellowship, which typically is what you're doing in that 2nd year of the fellowship. But it's also important to highlight in the 1st year the broad exposure that typically you get in your 1st year of the fellowship, and that you've been exposed to many different areas. As like what Jillian said, someone might not be as knowledgeable about what a fellowship program is like, and that is something that's very different than someone who's maybe coming out of some other entry-level job, is that they don't always have that same exposure throughout an organization that a fellow would have.
Perfect, thank you. And then this is another transition point to the resume, but when creating the cover letters for jobs outside the organization, how detailed should they be?
I would say for a cover letter, I would be fairly high level and just maybe highlight key differentiators. I think most people coming out of a fellowship, whether it's a 1-year or 2-year fellowship, have very similar experiences globally. And so I would just focus not on every experience, but on those that really make you stand out and are differentiated. And so I would think of it from the perspective of the person reading it, what will stand out.
Perfect. How do you market your experience as a fellow if an outside organization does not have an understanding of what a fellow is? So this kind of goes back to your point, both Caitlin and Jillian, how you guys mentioned writing it on your resume, so on and so forth.
Right, and I think during interviews, might be a chance for you to really explain what a fellowship program is and what you did during that time. But I would say, on your resume or cover letter, you don't need to go into a lot of details, but it's marketing it in a way of these are the things you were able to accomplish, but you've worked on projects in other areas as well, and maybe listing those out that catches someone's eye, saying they've been able to expose themselves to many different areas of their organization during a short amount of time.
The other thing I would add is oftentimes in the resume, the cover letter, and an interview, there are a fair number of subjective statements that can often be made. And so, there's likely not someone who's interviewed for a job saying, I am not motivated, I'm not self-driven, I am not hardworking. I mean, people tend to give accolades, but they're all very subjective. And so to me, the key is to be able to say as evidenced by, and so to link the subjective statements with specific evidence to back things up. And so for my advice, it would be to try to avoid the generalities. Even if you think it's true that you are incredibly passionate about the work that you do, every single person will be referencing their passion for healthcare and for helping others. So being able to pivot to as evidenced by and give examples of how your passion manifests itself, I think is really key. And so I would avoid any reference that is subjective, that is not able to be linked with the as evidenced by type of statement.
I believe my LinkedIn says passionate about, so I will definitely be going changing that right after this ends. So no, I really do appreciate all these insights. Are very important for us, especially as young professionals, and we move forward. We connect with a bunch of mentors, and everyone tells us different things from their point of view. So we definitely appreciate everything you guys have to contribute as well. And the last question we have in the queue is, how do you adjust from going from the highest level executive meetings and having one-on-ones with executives to having standard meetings of managers or directors? And the second part is it difficult to go from having a high level understanding of what's going on at your organization to a more siloed perspective?
So I think this is one of those skills that gets easier over time. I remember when I was a fellow and I was doing that, and I was just like, you're trying to understand everything, and then as you get more experience in your career, I think this is something that tends to come easier. I'm not saying it's natural, it's just easier. And I do this every day. I'll be in a meeting with an executive vice president, I'll move down and I'll be in meetings with directors, managers, and analysts. And I would try to think through, what is the level of detail in which they operate? How much do they actually need to know? And I've generally found with executives, if you go too much in the weeds, unless you're like with the classic CFO, and I hate to kind of cast it that way, but you go too much into the weeds sometimes, it's a little too much. But there are some executives who are like, I want to get into the weeds. So you have to kind of cater it to the person that you're sitting across the table with, and what their style is. And in organizations, you tend to hear, especially for folks who are executives, what their style is like through others. And sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not an accurate representation. So just through experience, just, finesse that. With teams, I find it much better, especially if you're talking to a director or manager, to always go in with content. And that doesn't mean you need to have everything scripted, but if you're having a regular meeting with someone, you should know what you want to talk to them about. Where's the material? Have you been thoughtful about how you're using their time? These are the kind of things that over years I've been able to get better at. But it's something that I just think, be patient with yourself and just try and be cognizant of how you're using other people's time and what level of detail they need to know from meeting to meeting.
And I would say, from the question that was asked, I think I found the same to be true in terms of having significantly more senior leadership access as a fellow, as opposed to being promoted to my first post-fellowship role as an operations manager. I was really expected to go manage the day-to-day operations of my service line, and I had less time rubbing shoulders with the senior leadership team. And so for me, what that meant was I needed to be more intentional about finding ways to connect with those mentors, in cases where it was served up to me on a silver platter as a fellow, I had to go and really network more to maintain those relationships. But it's just a part of the natural order where fellows come in, have significant senior leadership exposure, move into operational roles, and are focused more at the front lines.
And that's an adjustment for sure. At least it was for me when I finished my fellowship, that you're like around CEOs and presidents all day, and then you just don't have as much access to them. You were privy to information that was really great to know when you were a fellow, and then all of a sudden you're not in those strategic discussions anymore. And I think mentally preparing yourself for that shift is important, so that you don't feel that you're missing out, that you are handling the transition as well as possible, because we all go through career transitions, and how you manage it really does influence how you get started off in your next role.
Perfect. And I can add a 2 cents just because I've seen it happen specifically here at CHLA. Our CEO, Paul Viviano, goes out of his way, and the previous fellows from last year and the year before, he sets up time with them every few months just to do a quick check-in, just to make sure that, he's still connected in and involved in their professional lives, as well as, making sure that everything is going on while outside the organization as well. So, but it's all about managing those conversations and managing that relationship continuously throughout, as you guys have both alluded to. And so the next question we have is, what is the best way to connect with individuals in the organizations that you would aspire to work for? Many times, many organizations promote and hire internally, which is great, but it can be hard to get your foot in the door if you're an external applicant.
Yeah, I would agree that it would be very difficult to apply somewhere where you're just finding a job posting online and submitting an application, you're likely not to really hear back from there. So I think I would focus on using your networks. Like, as others have mentioned before, there are alumni networks that are available to you either with your graduate program or your current fellowship or residency program, and just finding people who know someone somewhere who will connect you. You might not know someone specifically within that organization, but asking around, seeing if someone else knows someone there that you can talk to, and starting that way. Because I would agree with the way that question is worded, that just putting in an application online will be very challenging for you to really get your foot in the door that way.
You know, one of the things about a fellowship is you're surrounded by healthcare executives at your organization, and this is a bit of an assumption, so I'm calling it out, but it's safe to assume that they have networks themselves and they're at that kind of level. And so if you bring them along in that process and they're supportive of your career, perhaps they know folks that they can introduce you to as well. You could also use ACHE's resources, you know, and in addition to that, sometimes it's just luck. Sometimes it's knowing the right person at the right time, and it doesn't sound right, but it's just the reality. I have certainly gotten a few roles that way, being in the right place at the right time at the right networking event. So I think you can certainly connect with folks, but I also think when you're at these kind of networking events or professional events, kind of being on your game and being aware that at any moment you can meet someone who could open up a door for you. There's research that shows that it's not your direct connections with folks, but it's their direct connections that help you get roles. And so it's like two removed. And so thinking about it in that way, I think, might help as you look for other roles.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And then we have one other one in the queue over here. It is, if a fellow is looking to move from the current healthcare setting, so for example, an academic medicine setting back into the traditional hospital setting, how do you recommend navigating that transition and explaining it to potential employers?
I don't think that change is that big of a change. I could be minimizing this, but like I've moved from provider to consulting with providers and payers to private equity to an insurer, which was acquired by a retailer and PBM company. And so I'm still, even though I've gone through all that, they all still associate me as someone who worked in the provider setting, interestingly enough, right? And so I think it's how you tell your story. You know, AMCs and community hospitals are different, right? But it's still provider. And so you know, it just depends on the experience you're looking for. If it's an AMC, then you want to talk about what makes them different from other hospitals, community hospitals, for example, and what attracts you to that. If it's a community hospital setting, I've been in interviews where I've heard people say, I want to be in a community hospital setting because it's a smaller environment. I want to be in the community. There's more opportunity for me to move around. I mean, there's all sorts of things that you can say, but I don't think that transition is as big as it may seem, but I don't want to minimize it. And I welcome, you know, the other panelists' views on this since they actually are working in provider settings.
I would agree. I think healthcare is small. It is a continuum, and transitions can be very fluid. I would focus on how you leverage your skill sets in a new environment and linking it to a desire for growth and development. And so if you look at it from that perspective, it is less of a shocking, jarring change than really just fluid movement between a very small and connected industry.
And the lines are blurring more and more, and I think if I were to put money on it, I'd say, you know, I mean, when I see Amazon and Berkshire Hathaway, you know, in an arrangement, it doesn't surprise me. When I see Apple having electronic health records, it doesn't surprise me. When I see a pharmacy benefit manager purchasing a payer, that doesn't shock me anymore. And I think that it used to, but now it really, the lines are blurring between the different traditional segments in our industry. And I think to some extent that's very, very exciting, and it poses a lot of different opportunities. So I would encourage everyone who's on this call, I think my work in the provider setting has been some of the most meaningful work I've ever done. But there are so many other opportunities that you can take advantage of, where you can leverage your skill set and your passion for this work in other segments of the healthcare industry as well. And so I would encourage you to keep your mind open to that as well.
Perfect. Thank you all very much. Jillian, AJ, and Caitlin, we really do appreciate your time. Thank you again to Natasha for helping getting this coordinated, as well as to all my co-fellows and everyone on the fellowship subcommittee. Before we leave, I wanted to leave some time to save the dates and important discussion points. There is a fellowship exchange happening on Sunday, March 3rd from 2 to 6 p.m. in Chicago. It's on the Sunday before ACHA's Monday conference kicks off. So go ahead and reserve your spots as seats are limited. There is an NCAF member meeting on Tuesday, March 6th from 12 to 2. Please go ahead and RSVP for that as well. And all these should have come out in communications if you are on the email subscription. And lastly, ACHE, AUPHA, and NCAF postgraduate fellowship experience is also on Tuesday, March 6th from 7 to 4:45 p.m. There is a fellowship fair from 2:15 to 4:45. There are 2 of them occurring. So one of them is 2:15 to 3:15, I believe, and then one from 3:45 to 4:45, if memory serves me correctly. You can go ahead and sign up for a table to broadcast your fellowship. And then, to my knowledge, I believe the students come around and it's like a kind of speed dating networking type of thing. So go ahead and feel free to register there, and it's $150, and the link is there for you. And lastly, I want to, the screen changes. Again, this is the Fellows Education Subcommittee, so thank you. All of these individuals helped coordinate and come up with the questions that we thought would benefit everyone here. And then your questions on the side chat bar have been very, very helpful, especially for me as I'm thinking about next steps. And then again, thank you again to Caitlin, AJ, and Jillian for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. That was great.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I will see you guys soon.
Yeah.
I'll see you in Chicago.
Great. I'll see you soon. Take care.
Bye.